everyone. We are here tonight. Another Next Tribe event, another virtual event. We're so happy to be here. We've taken a little bit of a break, but we're coming back strong because we have a great panel tonight. We have not one, not two, but three career experts who can really talk to you about making this chapter of your career the best ever. I mean, we know that we have experience and wisdom. We know we're at the peak of our career, but sometimes other people don't recognize that, right? So we got to make sure we figure out how to make sure how they can know what we can do, and we can follow through and make our careers and our lives as full as possible right now. So I'm going to introduce our moderator in a minute, but I first wanted to do a tiny bit of business where I put out word that 3 of you who signed up in a certain amount of time, we're going to get free copies of Bonnie Marcus's book called Not Done Yet. And so I want to tell Mary Kraftcheck, Karen Heim, and Mindy Oringer that you were the 3 chosen at random, and I'll get back to you and you can get Bonnie's book. And also, one thing we're going to do is we're going to have the chat open as well. We're going to ask people to write their questions in the chat, and then once the panelists have finished their conversation, I'll be calling on certain ones of you to ask your questions yourself to the panelists, and we're going to give one copy of each book because you can see here we've got 3 amazing books, but we're going to give one copy of each book to somebody who's been very active in the comments and chatting, making comments and questions and so forth. And also really fast, I want to tell you about some things coming up for Next Tribe. You have to look at, we have a short story contest, April 11th. It's exclusively for women over 45. So your odds are really good. And we know there's a lot of great talent out there. So I hope you'll enter that. And we were just talking before everyone started coming in about some of our Next Tribe trips. We're going to taking women. We're back. We're traveling again, starting in September. Santa Fe, San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, though that one just sold out. Big Bend and Marfa. Marfa, Texas is a huge art center. And then we're going to we do our annual beach retreat on the Pacific with a week where we take over a whole hotel. It's fabulous. So let me introduce our moderator today. She is Cathie Black, and she's a very well-known media executive. I've known her name because I've worked in magazines for so long. I've known her name, it seems like a lot of my career, but just worshiping at the name Cathie Black. But she's also a best-selling author, now an advisor, board member, and investor in digital startups and entrepreneurial companies. Black was president, then chairman of Hearst magazines, one of the largest publishers of monthly magazines, for 15 years. And that's Cosmopolitan, Oprah, Good Housekeeping, Esquire, all of those. So that's all, she was in charge of all of those. And I love this too. She was named to Fortune magazine's list of the most powerful women in business for 11 consecutive years, and also for many years to Forbes Power List. So let's hear it for the power that is Cathie Black. I'm going to hand it over to you, Cathie, to take it from here.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm thrilled to see a couple of faces that I do know. The Tom Harvey is my husband. He will be dismissed in a minute or two. And also meeting people from Next Tribe. I hadn't met Bonnie Marcus before. I do know Joann Lublin, and then to meet Jeannie and see what she does to put on these amazing events. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you again, Jeannie. I did spend a long time in the media business. I decided to write my own book, Basic Black, The Essential Guide for Getting Ahead at Work and in Life. It was an overview of a very long career. In fact, there's a woman on the Zoom tonight, Deborah, with whom I worked at New York Magazine. I wouldn't even say how long ago it was, but it was really sweet to have her join. But I went up to talk in the book about really having a great career, that's all good, but also to talk about it in an instructive way. I felt very strongly that every job has its highs and lows, and of course, disappointments. No matter how big and fat your title is, it is still the same thing. What I wanted, though, was to have the reader experience real life lessons. And I could tell stories about, pitching Oprah Winfrey to do the magazine, and I worked for Rupert Murdoch, and, yada, yada. But I wanted them to have takeaways that were real and they could really apply to their own daily lives, with tips and ideas and, how you get up from falling down and all the things that we have all been through, for me, certainly for decades. And then I thought about, The Office. But then, of course, we were just chatting for a minute or two. Who's even going to ever remember their offices? Are we ever going to go back to offices? But we had a lot of fun in those offices, that's for sure. But I wanted to have practical advice that they really could take to action. So Basic Black sold really well, about 150,000 copies, and was translated into 12 languages. But I wasn't sure that I had another book in me, but sometimes I think about it. But this is not about Cathie tonight. It really is about Bonnie Marcus and Joann Lublin. And so it gives me great pleasure to turn over to their moment in the sun. So I've known Joann for a really long time. She's interviewed me many times when she was a very prominent editor and writer for the Wall Street Journal, much of it being on workplace issues. She's a dedicated journalist, and never forget that when you're interviewed by somebody. Don't ever think they are your friend necessarily. But she's written 2 books, but this one, which you can see behind you to the right in the bright blue, Power Moms, is really interesting. It is how executive mothers navigate work and life. It's powerful in its analytics of how trailblazer, this is a hard one to say, trailblazer, baby boomer executive women. Now, who can repeat that? You're speechless. Okay. How they persevered, and the comparisons to the more relaxed approach that Gen Xers follow. Today, it's very enlightening. And yet, the gains we've made are enormous, but we all know, as we've crawled our way up, that there is still so far to go and things still happen, which really are so disappointing. Then you add a new dynamic of sort of a new word, ageism, and getting a job over 50, when women hit wall after wall after wall. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. An article in the New York Post a few weeks back states that it's sad, and I'm just going to quote this, it's a sad fact that older women often face a higher hurdle while finding employment, and add the pandemic onto that, and they've been losing jobs at very worrisome rates. Since February, the unemployment rate for females over 55, now we're not talking about executive females, but we're talking about just women in general, over 55, has almost doubled. Bonnie, this is your theme, and yet right up your alley. Bonnie is now a brand new friend of mine. 2 times we've met over the internet. And in addition to her book, It's Not Done Yet, she's a global guru top 30 coach. There's a lot of word trips here, I'll tell you. And she's also an author of The Politics of Promotion. How does one get ahead and, most importantly, stay ahead? Her new book, It's Not Done Yet, takes on these new ageism issues with straight talk, with great wit, empowers with great insight and inspiration, and I think a really important word, empathy. The book is so full of good advice, acknowledging the fears and unfair assumptions about this women and this category, this age category, but countering, she does, with tips, exercises, and flourish with confidence. She's really sharp. She keeps remembering that you, by now, have a lot of wisdom and experience. There are ways to recast it with new insights about gendered ageism. And yes, it is real, but you also are not done yet. So my first question to Bonnie, rev up. Would you explain to our participants exactly what you mean by gendered ageism, and how does it work for professional women over the age of 50?
Well, thanks, Cathie. And hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. Gendered age, well, for most of us who are probably over 45, 50, 60, whatever, we have experienced gender bias our entire careers. And probably in the beginning of our careers, it was a lot more overt than it is now. Now it's more subtle. Companies are addressing gender bias. But the fact of the matter is, it's still an unlevel playing field, and women are still subjected to gender bias. We aren't paid equally. We lack the opportunities for advancement, for sponsorship. So it still exists, even though it may not be as overt as it was certainly when I started my career. And a lot more, there was a lot more outward gender bias and sexism. But now, as we approach 50, 60 and beyond, and we start to show visible signs of aging, we are now subjected to the combination of gender bias and ageism. And it's triggered by what Catalyst calls lookism. And that is the pressure to be young and attractive in order to be successful. So as women start to show visible signs of aging, they are viewed as, drum roll here, less competent, irrelevant, not capable of doing big jobs. And what happens is we end up being marginalized and sidelined, and our workload is redistributed, and we find ourselves also subjected to sometimes really demeaning remarks. And this is real, Cathie and everyone, and this is reality, and it's so important because it affects our financial viability, it affects our job security. And
sure.
The reason I wrote this book is I think it's still under the radar. I think that many people, especially in companies, are not aware of the existence of gendered ageism and the effect on women. And so I wanted to bring awareness to the topic, and also to give women the voice and the tools to deal with it.
Very important comments, and a lot of insight there for many of us to understand. So second, what are some things that a 50+ person can do to stay marketable and keep their jobs?
Well, first of all, I want to add one more comment to the first question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
That women, research shows that women face ageism before men. So that's just another little thing that I want to put out there. And that has to do with the emphasis on our looks. So that is another factor. So what do women need to do? Well, I think the overarching message is that we need to be proactive. Many of us feel like, wow, this great career, we've accomplished all these things, and that is going to carry us all the way through to retirement, because we're unaware that, perhaps when we're 40, 45, even as we're approaching 50, that we may be subjected to ageism. So some of the things that, the tips in the book, and there's a whole big section on what you can do to stay marketable, but the overall thing is to be proactive. So for instance, cultivate your growth mindset is one chapter. What do you need to do in terms of improving your skills, or what new skills do you need to be able to stay at the top of your game? And not even in the present, think in the future. Maybe you need to do some homework or some research in your industry to see what's coming up and what are some of the future trends. It's important to be proactive and stay at the top of your game. One of the women I interviewed in the book was, she lost her job because she wasn't proficient at an online training program, and she was head of education. And so it was a really good reason for somebody to say, okay, you're out of here. Another thing is to be visible. And in the book, I suggest that you be proactive this way, understand that People may actually be not including you in meetings and not calling on you in meetings. So you can be proactive and create a visibility plan for yourself. And what does that look like in your workplace? What are some of the ways that you can be visible and actually create a proactive plan like that? There's some other ones, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit, especially when we bring in Joann's book about networking and cross-generational networking and expanding our network to include all generations to be able to learn from each other. And then, of course, one that I want to emphasize is own your wisdom and experience and own the power of your age and don't apologize for it. Understand the value that you bring to the workplace, what you contribute, and how you can help your organization reach its objectives and move forward, given all that talent and experience that you have. So those are a few tips.
That's great. Really great. Another question that we'd pose to you. Why do our own internalized fears and assumptions about aging hold us back?
I'm glad you asked that question. That's the whole first part of my book. Ageist assumptions are so ingrained in our society that we don't even realize the extent of them or the power of them. You know, if you go to buy a birthday card for one of your friends, especially a female friend, and you try to be objective and you look at these cards and it's like, oh, you know, we need another drink to be able to face this birthday, haha. Or I bet you forgot, you know, when you walked into the room, what you were looking for. I mean, all these ageist kind of comments, but we laugh along with it. And it isn't really until I started writing this book and doing research and interviews that I realized how prevalent, you know, it's how ingrained this is in our society. But what happens is we internalize some of these fears, beliefs, and assumptions, and we don't realize it. And we don't realize that when we do, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecies. We end up holding ourselves back. So for instance, if you think you're too old to compete or get promoted, or too old to ask for a raise, then you are not going to do necessarily what you need to do to get that promotion. You may stay on the sideline. You may be hesitant to raise your hand or volunteer for special projects. You may not create the visibility and credibility you need. So it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then, you know, you are going to be overlooked. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is the importance of really understanding what some of these beliefs you have, do they in fact support you or sabotage you? And it's important to identify if they're not going to support you, that you need to give them less energy.
Well done. Well said. So another question to you. Why is it important for younger women to have senior women in leadership in their company?
Well, this is all about Joann's book too.
Yes, yes.
And I love, you know, the tie-in.
She will have her moment in the sun.
Okay. It's important for younger women to build relationships with older women who can serve as mentors and role models. When I just did a podcast earlier today with a young woman who said that she worked in a tech company in New York where everybody was 30. Everybody was 30, you know, and it's one of these hip kind of organizations. And she said what struck her was she didn't have any role models. She didn't have anybody to ask about, well, how do I ask for a raise? You know,
Was she 30 or so?
Hmm?
Was she
She
30 or so?
Yeah. Well, when she had this job, she was even younger. She was in her 20s. It was like her first job.
Yeah.
And so we talked a bit about how important it is for younger women to have these role models. Certainly, when you are starting out your career, it's important to look and use older women, more senior women in the workplace as role models. You know, how did they get ahead, right? What are some of the ways that they communicate, that they conduct meetings, that who is in their network? So you can certainly use those women as role models, but the important thing is that we've been around the block a few times. I know I certainly have. And over the course of my career, not only have I gained a lot of wisdom, learned lots of lessons, missteps that I've learned a lot from that I can certainly pass along. But we also we know a lot of people. We have a lot of connections. And so our younger colleagues could certainly benefit from that. You know, we can open up doors for them. And so that's another opportunity, you know, to strengthen that relationship and have it be more of a win-win for both parties.
Well, I think we could turn over to Joann. And I'm going to flip back and forth between the two of them a little bit. So Joann, one question. How have some boomer executive mothers reinvented themselves for later in their careers?
Thank you very much for doing this tonight, Cathie. And as you know, I'm a big fan of yours and I'm a big fan of Bonnie's. And as I've gotten to know her, I'm a big fan of Jeannie's too.
Yes, it's just a little love fest.
And I think this, overarching theme about the importance of remaining relevant and involved in our careers takes on a new aspect if we think about reinventing ourselves later in our careers. So in my book, Power Moms, I looked at 86 executive mothers who were roughly evenly split between two generations. Half of them were our generation, the boomer moms, and the other half were women anywhere from their early 30s to early 40s, Gen Xers and millennials. And among those boomer moms, there were several who reinvented themselves later in their careers. And they went in different directions. In a couple cases, they left giant jobs at really big corporations to go become CEOs of startups. For instance, there was Diane Bryant, who was at the point when she left Intel, the highest ranking woman at Intel. She's now CEO of something called Nova Signal, which will be going public at some point. And then there's Ellen Kullman, who, as we all remember, was CEO of DuPont. She's now running a startup called Carbon. Both companies, I'm sure none of us have ever heard of. There was a second group of boomers who switched industries as a way of sort of reinventing themselves. Lisa Mann, who had been a Pepsi executive, and before that, she had been at Mondelez and Kraft. Very recently, she left the consumer goods space, and she's now the chief marketing officer at Rains International, which is a mid-sized executive search firm. I did an event with her about my new book, and she's really happy, in a completely new space and industry she knew absolutely nothing about. And the third way that some of these boomer moms have reinvented themselves is they've pursued a second career in the nonprofit arena. And I think the good example of that is Andrea Jung. Andrea Jung was in her early 40s when she became the first female CEO of Avon Products. Did that for 12 years, by the way, as a single mom that entire time. And now she's running something called Grameen America. It's one of the fastest growing microfinance organizations in the United States. It basically gives women seed money to start micro businesses.
The stories are endless. I mean, they're really totally amazing. So go on from there. In what ways did first generation power moms help their grown daughters succeed in the workplace?
Well, again, let's put it in the context of the book. So altogether, I interviewed 111 women the 86 mothers from those two waves. And then separately, I interviewed 25 adult daughters of the boomers, including Cathie's daughter, to find out
Well,
what
I
was,
just called if you heard the phone ring, sorry.
what was it like growing up having Cathie Black as your mother. And frankly, the idea for including the adult daughters grew out of the fact that when we had the book launch party for Earning It, and I brought my daughter into the office before we went to the event, she met my boss. And the first thing my boss said to my daughter was, "What was it like growing up having Joann Lublin as your mother?" And poor Ava didn't know what to say. And so she said, "I don't know, she was just mom to me." But in terms of the networking advice that these boomer moms gave to their adult daughters, what they did was overall is they taught them how to network. They taught them how to network early and how to network often. There were even a couple of cases where the boomer mom insisted that their daughter put together a LinkedIn profile when they were in high school, or start, meeting with people who might be from the industry that they might go into when they got to college. But then that assistance that they gave to their adult daughters took other forms beyond networking. For instance, Melanie Cusin, who is a vice chair of Corn Ferry, she taught her daughter, as she became an adult, how to stand her ground in uncomfortable situations. Because you know what? Melanie had been there, done that. She often would find herself trying to pitch an assignment as an executive recruiter and having to over prepare because she was a woman, and still getting sort of dismissed out of hand by sexist comments like, "Well, how could you possibly know anything about this industry? You're just a girl." A second way was how some of these power moms from the boomer generation got involved with coaching their daughters when they were not only trying to look for a promotion, but also look for a new job. Hope Neiman, who is the chief marketing officer at Tilster, was very instrumental, not only in helping her daughter get a promotion, but when the daughter wanted to change employers, it so happened that a woman who had worked for Hope at Tilster was now a vice president at another company that needed a product manager. And that's what her daughter really wanted to do. He not only introduced her to this former colleague, but she obviously vouched for the daughter. And the former colleague so trusted this recommendation from Hope that she didn't even bother to check any of the references, hires the daughter, and within a few months, the daughter gets promoted. A third approach that was taken by a woman named Jane Parker, who's actually maybe something that you know, Cathie, because she's a big mucky-muck in the advertising industry. Her adult daughter was a supervisor for the first time and suddenly had to confront one of her employees who was an underperformer. And she was terrified because she had never had to give negative feedback to anybody because she hadn't been a boss before. And so what she did was she called her mother and summoned her out of a meeting for what to do while she's walking down the street in Manhattan saying, "I just got this email, I got to do this afternoon, or at least, start getting ready for this." And her mom took the time to help her daughter prepare talking points. And even by phone, they role played how it was she was going to instruct this underperforming employee about why she was not doing a good job.
Well, I think that's a tough one, because for all of us who have had to counsel somebody or remove them or whatever, it's very tough. But I'm sort of smiling because about 2 weeks ago, I had an email from a very successful investment woman, and I worked together with her husband, George Green, who's unfortunately passed away, but he was fabulous and she's fabulous, and they have a really great daughter. Sort of one of those kids who's just excelled at everything all the way up. Never would go out for dinner with them on a Saturday night because she was still studying. I mean, at 9 years old. But anyway, so she emails me, the mother emails me the other day and said, Liz was very interested in a company, and she thought that I might know the CEO, of the company where the CEO was on the board of, so one step removed, sorry. And did I know her? And I said, oh, well, I know her very well, but I'm sure she'd put you in touch, but she's actually running a SPAC right now. And so she's taking the company public, so she's crazed. So I said, well, send me the kind of cover letter that you would write to her. And I got this letter from this brilliant girl, 29 years of age, who's been at a bank for 4 years, that was the most stilted English you have read in 40 years. Just big words and no, and I said, I don't know how to say this to you, but you have to completely rewrite that letter. And she said, why? And I said, because the company that you are interested in is hip and trendy with, dozens, hundreds of younger people working there. And you sound like you're writing to the chairman of the board of some old-fashioned company. So she sends me a revise, and I said, geez, we still got to go over this. I spend more hours with this girl than I have with my daughter trying to get her a job. But, sometimes they've been taught so many serious things that they don't even know how to open up to, welcome advice and whatever. Anyway, we finally got it out. And I don't know, I always say to anybody that I've helped with the job, I said, for God's sake, keep me in touch. I'm interested in whether you get the job or not. Don't just kind of leave us hanging for me to write and say, oh, did anything ever come of that? So I think there's some things that the younger generation just doesn't get and has perhaps not been as well trained as the older generation. I grew up in the era when if you had a call or an appointment, you wrote a great thank you note right after, and stuff like that. And, these kids send like an email of one sentence, like, how much do you want that job? And they kind of don't quite get it.
Well, to the point you were just making, I was also struck that in many cases, not all of these adult daughters regard their power mother as their secret weapon when it came to career advancement, but they bragged about what she did to their friends. And so their contemporaries, other young women would come to them and say, could your mom like...
Yeah.
Oh,
Been there, done that, right? So Joann, another question. What key lessons did younger wave women learn from their stay-at-home moms?
And I think
some of the comments in your book were just stunning about what both the older generation and the younger generation, the thing that I keep in my mind is their comments about they never went to bed without their cell phone, forget being on your bedstand, on their pillow.
underneath.
Or underneath their pillow. It reminds me, we're watching Homeland, not Homeland, the White House one. And here's her husband and here's she and here's her phone and she's on it all night long. But anyway, that's sort of an aside.
So a number of these younger executive mothers grew up with a mom who, for the most part, had worked inside the home rather than outside the home when they were growing up. And nevertheless, even though that mom was not a power mom as defined in my book, which was an executive of a business, these stay-at-home moms became hugely influential and powerful role models in other ways. And I think the best way to illustrate that is to tell the story about one of those Gen Xer moms. And it's a woman named Dana Spanola. She founded a company called Sabbatical, which she initially created just as one boutique store where women could come and buy clothing for under $100 because she thought it was ridiculous that there weren't stores like that. And she is the daughter of a very creative mom who did not start working full-time as an interior decorator until Dana got to college. But all through her childhood, because her mom was so artistic and so creative and made clothes actually for Dana, she always inspired Dana to think big. And she would say to her, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing, which I think is a great, great line. But when Dana decided that she was going to abandon corporate America and start this women's clothing boutique, she objected. And Dana was absolutely crushed because, you expect your mother to be there on the sideline cheering, yeah, go for it, go be an entrepreneur. And she basically stopped her in her tracks by saying, well, do you have a plan? And no, she hadn't put together a business plan. And she said to her, being an entrepreneur, there is no financial security. You're not going to have a salary to fall back on. You ought to think about having some kind of a formal business plan. So as crushed as she was by the fact her mother was not impressed by what she was trying to do, she did go out and put together a business plan. And then she went to 14 different banks to try and get seed money for this, what was going to be a one-store shop. It was going to be one outlet. And everybody turned her down, and she finally got a $70,000 line of credit from a guy who was a friend of her father's. Today, Fabrique is a highly successful chain, mostly franchises of boutiques of women's clothing spread all over. And she thanks her mom for having taught her right and set her on the right course to make it happen.
Wow. For the next few minutes, I'm going to toss some questions out to Joann and Bonnie that I think will get them thinking and be, hopefully interesting to our listeners here, or to our participants, I should say. And then at about it's now 7:06. At about 7:15, we're going to turn back to the major domo, Jeannie, who is going to welcome all of you with your questions, and hopefully you will have some, and as you wildly wave your hands or on the chat room, etc. So these are just kind of random. What is the one thing that you, Bonnie, wish that in this past year had taught you?
What's the one thing I wish it did, or that it did?
What is the one thing that this past year, sorry, I got the wrong, this year
Has taught me?
Yeah.
It's one thing I actually talk about in my book, but I think this past year it was more important than ever. And that is choosing joy.
Nice.
We are often this past year has just been incredible. I don't need to tell anybody. And to recap the pain and suffering and the empathy that we have all felt for people who have lost loved ones. It's been terrible. Not only that, people who've lost jobs, people, especially women, who've been suffering so much. And I think the tendency is to just get so caught up in the negativity and the feeling almost that we're powerless and victims of what's going on. But what I like to emphasize, certainly in my book, and it's not just so you are like, oh, I feel better today. It's what feeling better today, intentionally looking for joy, brings to you in terms of fueling your energy, whether it's, with your career or your relationships, your life in general. And when you make that intention to look for joy, to choose joy, it's amazing how you will then find it. But otherwise, it just passes us over. So I think that's one thing that's really helped me this past year when things have been tough.
Joann, you want to chime in?
Sure. I think the most important thing I have learned during this past year is the importance, adding on to what Bonnie was saying, of self-care. And I think too often we are so stretched and so pulled in many directions, especially those of us who are mothers and those of us who have been mothers who have been trying to school-age children from home while holding down a job, that we feel like not only is there no time for self-care, but that self-care is selfish. And it's not. At the end of the day, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of those who love us and who we love, and we can't take care of our commitment to our job. And so self-care is actually selfless, not selfish. And so I have been pretty religious about, unless it's really raining very hard, of getting in my daily walk and just getting out of Dodge, getting out of the house.
But you did say earlier that yesterday or whatever was the first time you had been to a grocery store in a year.
I haven't yet.
Oh, you haven't yet? Oh, sorry.
Tomorrow will be 2 weeks from my second
Oh,
inoculation. So on Saturday, I'm going to a grocery store for the first time in a year. We've had all our food delivered.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing, all these little things that take on, so much more importance all of a sudden. Joann, since you're on a roll, what's the one trait that has been essential to your success?
I think the one trait that has been essential to my success has been in the belief of paying it forward. I don't wait for people to do something for me. I go ahead and do something for them without, expecting anything in return. And frankly, it is why, because many people have said to me, why would 52 high-level executive women have agreed to talk to you on the record for earning it? And the vast majority of them being public company experienced CEOs. And why would 111 of such women have talked to you on the record for Power Moms? And I think it's because the smart and highly successful women in our economy are ones who do recognize the importance of paying it forward, whether that means going the extra mile to help somebody who works for you, or acting as that role model or sponsor for that younger woman who is not sure as to whether she wants to have kids and can't see how she can ever possibly succeed at the executive level with children, by showing how it's done.
Yeah. Great. Bonnie, what is the one thing that most people would be surprised to know about you?
That I don't have a business background. And most people say, wow, you ran a national company, you must have gone to business school, or, you were obviously trained somehow in business. And I started my career pretty much by accident. I was a kindergarten teacher and I taught aerobics. When I got a divorce, my kids were 6 and 8, and I needed, kindergarten teaching didn't pay the bills. And especially then, it was only like half day. So I decided I needed to find a 9-to-5 job. I answered an ad in the paper. I went in and interviewed, and they told me I was overqualified. And I was begging with them, please, just give me a job. I just want a 9-to-5 job. But they said, you're overqualified. However, 2 weeks later, they called me back and they said, we're starting this joint venture with 30 docs, healthcare management company. They're looking for an administrator. Would you be willing to interview for it? And I had no qualifications whatsoever for this job. But I went, and I must have impressed them, and they hired me. They taught me the business, and in a year and a half, I was running 11 centers for them. And so that was my entree. That was my entree into business. But I didn't go to business school. I learned business on the job.
I went to a Catholic women's college in Washington, D.C., and people would look at my resume like, no MBA? Joann, how would you have answered that question? What is the one thing that people would be surprised to know about you?
The one thing that people would be surprised to know about me is that as a child, I wanted to be a famous novelist. And when I got my very first diary at age 10, I wrote in the very back of the book, so some future biographer could find it, how I already at that age had decided what my pseudonym would be when I started writing these famous novels. So I modeled my pseudonym after my favorite author. And so my pseudonym was going to be Marcy Wayne. So I'm going to throw this back to you, Cathie. Who was my favorite author? The name is patterned after his name. That will give you a clue. It was a he. Any idea?
Bonnie has it. I'm just drawing a blank.
All right, Bonnie, you want to guess?
I have it because I've interviewed Joann. It was Mark Twain.
Oh,
And Mark,
great.
of course, used a pseudonym. His real name was Samuel Clemens, and he was a journalist.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, our little segment, okay, boss, Jeannie, it's 7:15.
All right, you've got us on a good schedule. I lose track of time, so I'm so glad somebody's keeping track. So we have a lot of great questions, and I want to start with Anne Nikolai. If you want to unmute yourself, Anne, I hope you're still with us, because I want you to ask about the working for younger people question. Are you there, Anne? If you're not, wait, let me see. We might have lost her. Anyway, she has a great question. She might have had to go, but she had a great question that chances are we'll be reporting to someone younger, perhaps the age of our own children. How should we act around them when we should know more than they do about the business? Should we be deferential and careful not to correct them? Should we make them our project and mentor up? So I don't know if she didn't say who that was for, but let's start with Joann on that. What do you think? Oh, wait, she's here, but she can't unmute. So sorry. But anyway, I'll unmute you in a minute. I'm going to find you. But Joann, why don't you start? There you are. Why don't you start answering that question?
Well, I think it is really difficult to work for somebody who is younger than you, but it's equally difficult the other way around. I did a career column at one point about millennials who were becoming executives and were trying to boss people around who were 20 years older than them. And I think at the end of the day, you have to accept each other as grown-ups and qualified and sort of level the playing field in that sense. You know, don't try and be patronizing. Don't talk about, well, in my day, we used to do it this way, because again, you're pigeonholing yourself as older. And also regard this relationship as being a two-way street. You're going to give and get, and you're going to learn, and in turn, be able to share a lot of, knowledge and wisdom with this person who is, younger than you, but is now your boss.
Bonnie, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that we do have these age-related stereotypes. So we put people in categories based on their age, and then we make assumptions about them, and then we behave that way, a certain way towards them. And so I think regardless of whether, you're the older one, you're the younger one, the important thing is to kind of really put those ageist assumptions aside and build relationships based on the person, right? Yeah. Because once you have a one-on-one strong relationship, then you don't see people in a box. You are much more open to, wow, they've got that talent that I can, I can learn from them, or that's something that I can perhaps mentor them on. So I think we tend to put people in age categories and then judge them. And my tip would be just forge the relationship.
And
without, very good point.
Yeah, that is good. And Cathie, do you have anything to add? I think that's a really good.
No, I'm just sort of smiling because I can think back to when I was literally, Deborah Burns brought this up to me, that I was at New York Magazine and I was promoted to publisher, and a guy jumped up at the back of the audience of maybe, 80 people or something, and said, "Cathie Black, she used to work for me."
Oh.
And Joe Armstrong, my boss, said he's got a great sense of humor. He said, "Look, Jake, it happens to all of us, but one thing I did learn is that I went to law school for 3 years to learn that not all times is life fair."
That's good.
Amen. Amen.
And I don't so much, oh, Jeannie, I'm sorry. I didn't have a question, but just echoing so many of these fabulous thoughts. And I think to go back to an early one, it really is all about owning where you are and what you have, and to come at everything. There's always going to be a generational divide. There's always going to be unfairness. You can't focus and be against that. You have to be for something else. And owning the perspective that comes with age. My first book, as Jeannie knows, was published when I was 63. And I so did not have the perspective to write that book even 5 years earlier. I needed that distance and space and time. And then that whole thing led to another whole thing. And here comes number 2. And when you're mentoring people, and I pointed at myself because I'm every daughter's and every son's, can your mother, help? The interesting thing that you were saying, Joann, is I find as a boomer mother with a millennial daughter, the world is changing so dramatically right now that we may be the first generation of women who on paper surpassed not only their mothers, but perhaps their daughters. When HFM sold to Hearst, I was the chief innovation officer. With the way corporations are melting away, and you have untethered people doing their own thing and multi-hyphenating their way, you're going to have some stars. But that job in that big corporation where everyone kind of knelt before Cathie in those days, like they're not there in the same way for this next generation. And Joann, that was one question I had for you, is did you see that in your work? And is that really a thing, or am I imagining it?
Well, I think the pandemic has changed the equation, throughout the country in terms of how we work, where we work, and what the future shape of companies is going to be. So I think the answer to your question is TBD, because our daughters are going to succeed and flourish in different ways than we did. But it doesn't mean that they're not going to be equally or more successful. It really comes down to how you define success.
And
A new definition.
yes. Thank you, Deborah. That was great perspective. And I want to get Karen Heim. You had a question. If you want to unmute yourself, if I see you, yes, you had a question, which I think is very relevant.
Yeah, thank you. This is I'm learning so many new things. I really appreciate everybody's input. But my question is, what tips can you offer to a mom returning to the workforce after a long sabbatical to raise her children? So
I would say congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
So Bonnie, do you want to start with that? And then we'll also ask Joann, or
Sure.
either one.
Oh, go ahead, Joann.
Well, I think the important thing as you're returning to the workforce is to make sure, hopefully, while you've been raising your children, that you've been trying to keep your network alive. Even though you haven't been working for pay, you've been at least maintaining your social network, because that network, that professional network, particularly of other women, is going to be vital to not only opening doors and getting you those key introductions, but to help reorient you to what it is, in the world of work. And what the world of work is going to look like post-pandemic is very, very different. There are going to be many, many companies where working from home, either permanently, full-time, or permanently a part of the week, is going to be not only accepted, but encouraged, and be the way that people actually flourish on the job. And so to that extent, it's going to be both easier and harder to reintegrate yourself into the workplace, because, and I've talked to some women like this who have changed jobs over the last year, where they have yet to meet anybody face to face. And that's really difficult. But at the same time, long before the pandemic hit us, there were many, many companies out there who were starting what are called returnship programs. And the returnship programs is basically a year-long paid internship for an individual. And it's not just limited to women who stayed home to raise their kids. It can be men as well who had to take a break for, parental care issues. But the point is that you get to sample their wares and vice versa. And it's a tryout. And at the end of the returnship, if you have, met the test, then you get offered a permanent job.
Wow, we need to do a story about that, the returnship program. That sounds great.
I'm on the board of a small nonprofit called Path Forward, and it started out, it kind of came out of another company, but its mission to begin with was to create a returnship program for tech companies in California in particular, who are trying to get women engineers back into the workforce. And so they were wanted, which is different than perhaps some other situations. And it's been very successful. It's broadened since then. It's still small, but they've got a client list that is just fantastic. And they do a training program and sort of a internship program. It's not like a 1 year, but they are paid, and there's no guarantee that they will get a job. But they, most importantly, I think, Karen, is that their skill set gets modern. So they're upping their game in learning all of the new things that many women have not done or been able to when they're so busy, working, raising children.
I
mean,
love that. And Bonnie,
what I was going to say is, referring back to something I said earlier about being proactive and knowing what skills you need to improve, what new skills. So the returnship programs are great because they give you that kind of training. And outside of like specific job related skills, I would say what's important is to really take a good look at your mindset and re-enter the workforce with a very positive mindset, knowing that, yeah, you may have been gone for a while, but don't let that, put you in kind of a less than position, because you still have a lot to offer the workplace. And I think connecting with all of that, in my book, I talk about 2 different cases of women who were let go and were looking to find new jobs. And one of them had a really positive mindset about she's going to go out and, looking for a job. Was a full-time job. She actually got an office for herself when we did that, and it was a full-time job with networking and building relationships. And she got a job. She actually changed industries. The other woman, who was an attorney who was let go, then took a lesser job and then was kind of stuck in a rut. Anything I suggested to that woman, it was like, oh no, that's never going to work. Oh no, I don't think so. And so the 2 cases were just so, they just brought out the importance of how your mind, both of them were skilled. Both of them had great resumes, but one was able to position herself better because she had a more positive mindset about getting a job. It's not everything, but I mean,
I'm going to sneak in one other question because we're running out of time, but we'll go a little bit over maybe. It is Lisa, was it Lisa B or Lisa Reed, about the exhaustion or the fatigue? Where are you, Lisa Reed, about your fatigue? I thought it was a good one. If you're
I'm
not
here.
yeah.
I'm a lawyer, so that's why I asked that question. Still practicing happily, but I do find that the sexism in our profession creates fatigue over the years.
So you said, how do you combat that feeling of fatigue, of fighting ageism and that kind of thing? If you keep experiencing it.
Ageism and sexism.
Oh, and sexism, yeah.
Well, I'll take that one to start. It's interesting because, Lisa, when I decided to start doing research for this book, and I put out a call for women that I would like to interview for the book and to talk about gendered ageism, as opposed to the first book, when I asked for interviews and people wanted to talk about office politics, nobody really wanted to talk about this. But the women who did come forward, many of them were attorneys. So who had been, their workload was redistributed. They were taken off the partner track. They were, given different types of clients over the years. So, I mean, it is real. And unfortunately, the only way to counter that is to come back and connect with everything that you have to offer and continue to put yourself out there. Also, building relationships, having allies and champions can sometimes lift you. Even if it's women or things outside of work that lift you up and energize you, that is super important. Actually, one woman I interviewed, 58-year-old attorney in Silicon Valley who was subjected to a lot of ageism, and she was just so frustrated. And one of the things that helped her balance it was her girlfriends, hanging out with her girlfriends and going to the gym when that was possible. So sometimes, things outside of work can help balance some of the burnout that we're feeling and the frustration.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. And in fact, in my case, I switched from the private sector to government, about 7-ish years ago. And it was groups I was involved with, socially, ethnic groups, whatever. That's how I got the other job, not through my legal colleagues necessarily. So.
Well,
I
good.
would say that every job outside of that first one, all of my jobs were were from my network and referrals.
Good. And Joann, do you want to have one more thing about how to keep that spirit up and over a long career?
I think what's really very critical is to make sure you've got strong bonds with your female colleagues at work, whether they're informal or formal. But there are a lot of companies that have employee resource groups for working women, or employee resource groups for working parents, or just employee resource groups for moms. And not only the leadership skills that you learn from those groups, but the solidarity and support that you're not kind of going through the struggle alone is really, really important.
And we have people who've written great ideas for networking and organizations to take part of. What I'm going to do is put some of those in. I'm going to respond to everyone who is here tonight, and I'll put some of the resources in there. I might even throw a couple questions we didn't get to, maybe to all three of you, Cathie and Joann and Bonnie. If there's a few in there that I think could probably, maybe 2 or 3, that would you mind following up on so we can get those to people we didn't get to?
That's fine. Sure.
Okay, good. So we're not done yet. We got more. So anyway, this has been so great. And I've really learned something really big. I mean, I thought I knew all the stuff that was going on, but the returnship is like, I'm going to do a story about that, because that's like such solid information for people. And that's what I love about all three of you and your books. And so let me just remind you of the books. Bonnie Marcus is not done yet, just out, and Joann's book was out like first out just a couple months ago. It's doing great. Joann Lublin is Power Moms 4 weeks ago. Yay. And Cathie Black, her book was Basic Black. It was a while back, but it was a major bestseller, and lots of great advice from her. So I want to encourage you to use those as resources also. And I also ask all of you, if you feel like going on a trip or something, come check out our travel options. I think we're going to get Cathie Black and her friend of hers to go with us to Marfa and Big Bend. So we have a lot of fun. It's great. It's great women. And I think that's one of the big things, like we were just saying, is to build your network, take care, do some self-care. And I think that these are the kind of places, I hope Next Tribe can provide some of that. That's my goal. And thank you, Bonnie, thank you, Joann, and thank you, Cathie, and thank you all who attended. Please come to another one of our events.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great.
Ciao, ciao.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.